tried to straighten out that clock, didn't you? But did you find it?
Nope.
Oh. Oh, I guess it's only 5:30. So it is still.
No, it's 6:30.
No, but I mean.
Oh, that says 5:30. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking it had caught up, but I guess.
Wait a couple more seconds. See if anybody joins us online. All right, well, we'll get started. This is like watching it's like reading about a soap opera.
This?
Yeah,
Yeah, I thought so too.
crazy. I mean, it even begins this section with the way, you know, Samuel's sons are just like Eli's sons. You been doing the reading?
Yes, sir. Don't make no sense. But
That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Pastor to make sense of it.
Oh, that's a lot of pressure. So, as I thought about it now, I should have had us go through this chapter last week, but oh well. So anyway, you have Samuel grows old, and he sets up his son as judges for Israel, which is weird. It's kind of hard to figure out if that was the right thing to do or not, because if you go back to Exodus, that's what Moses did. He appointed judges. But if these are judges in the terms of, like, from the book of Judges, then they're not appointed. They're called. So, all I can say is I have grown to like Samuel less and less as the story goes on. And after we get this announcement about his sons being like Eli's sons, we have the elders of Israel asking them to set over us a king to rule us. And that's evil in Samuel's eyes, but they ask again anyway. But Samuel thought it was evil. What? Why do you think he thought it was evil?
because God's your ruler.
Well, that's, certainly what God says, but is that what Samuel was thinking?
He was probably high on something.
Maybe Samuel sort of liked being in charge.
That's what I was wondering too.
He was the one that could hear God.
Yeah.
So maybe he liked sort of saying every, thing there, and so that sort of by them saying, "Oh, well, we want a king," and not going, "Oh, Samuel, we want you to be king."
Right.
That sort of.
That's what I was wondering too. Is he like, I don't want to give up my power, or is he even, I know nobody in any church anywhere has ever said anything like this, but is he kind of stuck in the, but we've always done it this way?
As far as judges.
Yeah. So why change it? Now he goes, the Lord speaks to Samuel and says, hey, what you said, I'm their king, but they've cast me aside, and he tells him to heed their voice, which is going to be interesting soon. By the end of this session. And he says to warn them of the practice of the king that will reign over them. And I love this section. So basically, he says, okay, here's what's going to happen when you have a king. He's going to conscript, I can't speak. He's going to conscript your sons into the military. He's going to use the land for making weapons of war. He's going to demand servants from your families to see to the household, which, if you want the fancy word for that, is corvée. And then he's going to tax you. He's going to tax your fields, your vineyards, your olive trees, your crops. Some of your land he's going to give to his, the people who are his stewards and advisors and all that kind of stuff, who are serve some kind of official function in his house. But he makes this very interesting comment at the end when he says, your best male and female slaves and your cattle and your donkey he will take and use for his tasks. Your flocks he will tithe. And as for you, you will become his slaves. So remember, when God speaks to him just before this, he reminds them of bringing them out of Egypt and out of slavery. And here, this section, the warnings here end with, you're going to be slaves again. And they said, fine with us. And there's that key phrase that shows up 3 times, we will be like all the nations. Set over us as a king to rule us like all the nations. Give us a king to rule. And then here in the end, and we too will be like all the nations. So, not supposed to be like all the nations. This is supposed to be a different group. But notice that their understanding is that they're going to have a king, and the point of that king is for military power. He will rule us and sally forth before us and fight our battles. And then Samuel says, all right, go home. This is where Samuel gets weird to me. Weirder to me. You get a clear beginning of a new story. Because if you look at the first part of chapter 9, and there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, son of Abiel, son of Zeror, son of Bechorath, son of Ephiah, Benjamite, a man of great means. And if you go all the way back to the beginning, and there was a man from Ramathaim Zophim, from the high country of Ephraim. His name is Elkanah, son of Jeroam, son of Elihu, son of... So this is kind of a pattern in Scripture, is we have a new story or a different aspect of the story coming on. And he has a son, whose name is Saul, and I love the way they describe him. Basically, he's rich, he's handsome, he's tall, and he's strong. And the note that I have here, I thought was funny, because the comment here is for Saul, his physical stature becomes associated with a basic human misperception of what constitutes fitness to command. All you have to do is look at every election season. You don't see, well, you see them now, but they don't make it very far. The poor, ugly, short and fat people making it very far. You just don't see them. I just thought that was kind of a funny commentary that it's lasted all this time. What are your thoughts on Saul when you meet him?
I don't think it seems bad.
No.
Like, you know, like, I guess from what, you know, Samuel was told from God, like this and this and this is going to happen, I sort of expected Saul to come in and like take over,
Right?
and didn't really see that. You know.
Yeah, they kind of play him like a dumb country boy. Donkeys run away from Dad's house, and he's gone 3 days and can't find him. So what does he decide to do? Let's go ask the prophet. He'll tell us where they are. That's what they do. Did you notice, by the way, that he doesn't know the name of the prophet?
Is a seer.
Yeah, he's just a seer. There's a man of God in this town. We don't know who he is, but you know, remember where we left it, it was like he went everywhere, and everybody knew who Samuel was. Clearly that's not the case.
Well, you know, he says later, like the Benjamites were the smallest tribe of the smallest whatever, you know, so maybe.
But they weren't. No.
Oh.
They were pretty large, and his dad was loaded. I mean, he was a man of great means. So, you know, was Saul saying that to be humble? Or was it just kind of like, hey, this is how you're supposed to respond to these guys? I'm nobody type thing. It's kind of weird, but yeah, it's something, because I read that and I thought, man, that sounds just like Gideon. When the angel appears to him, he's like, and Gideon literally is nobody. I mean, he is the youngest person from the smallest family in the smallest tribe. And so when he says that, he's like, man, I really am nobody. Saul's probably a little bit of somebody. I mean, at least his dad's loaded. But, yeah, so I think it's kind of funny because in Old Testament stories like these, the pattern is that the first words out of someone's mouth is a giveaway to who they are. And what he says is, let's turn back. Lest my father cease worrying about the donkeys and worry about us. Which is kind of funny because it was exactly what happened. Later on, he says, your dad found the donkeys, now he's wondering where you are. So here's the guy who can't find the donkeys. This is going to be kind of a... This is where I kind of feel sorry for Saul in this story. Because he seems clueless most of the time. But he knows that he should find the answers. So he goes to see the seer, and you know, later on he's looking for an answer, and so he calls somebody to do a divination. And he gets no answer. I mean, it's like he keeps looking for an answer, and everybody's just like, don't tell him. So I feel bad for him a little bit. So as he walks into town, the ladies at the well say, tell him exactly where to go. And I think it's kind of funny because they repeat themselves so many times. And you have to wonder, is it because they think he's stupid? Or is it because he's so darn handsome they can't, they're just kind of stuttering or whatever? Or what is it? Why are they being so specific? And does it really matter? Because what does he do? Walks right up to Samuel and says, "Hey, do you know where the Sears house is?"
Oh, did he? I guess I missed that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I guess it says I'm the seer, Samuel replied.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they told him he would be going up, so they needed to catch him.
Yeah. And you have this little interlude here about God saying, "Hey, at this time tomorrow, I will send to you a man from the region of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him prince over my people." Notice it's not king; it's prince. But this is where a little bit of my question about Samuel came along, because we don't know how long has passed from when the people asked him for a king, and God said, "Yeah, go ahead and give him one." But he doesn't seem to be looking very hard. He's just kind of doing what he does. And when the Lord says to him, "At this time tomorrow, I will send to you a man from the region," it's almost like God is going, "I told you to look for someone, and you're not doing it, or at least you're not putting forth much effort, so I'm going to send someone directly to you." And specifically points Saul out.
But don't you think if you were in his place, you were in Samuel's place, that you would just wait for God to tell you too? Because, it's, your choices, and, you sent your sons and they were bad, so you don't want to sort of get the same thing, that Eli did. I'll just wait for you to tell me who you want, because
That's entirely possible. I just was wondering why, if he was dragging his feet, because God said, "Yeah, give him a king." Everybody's right there in front of him, and he says, "Go home." And now all of a sudden, God's like, "All right, I'm sending somebody to you." That's just kind of the way up. But yeah, it's entirely possible. He's like, "Okay, well, just let me know who. I'll just do my thing until you tell me who." But it's still kind of curious, because they go to the dinner and everything, and when they wake up in the morning, they go all the way out of town. And then Samuel looks at Saul's friend, or whatever, or this one keeps calling him a lad, so his servant or whatever, and says, "Why don't you go on ahead a little bit?" Why so secret? Everybody asked for it. God says, "Here's the guy." So why is Samuel just like, here's some oil on your head. Congratulations, you're king. And then he gives him this weird set of instructions. By the way, he doesn't make him king either. He names him prince again. So he says this is what's going to happen. Did it happen? but did that happen? He said this will happen. I mean, so we have you're gonna come across two people by Rachel's tomb, and they're gonna say the donkeys you went out to seek have been found, and look, your father's been put aside the matter and is worrying about you. Then you're gonna come up on this. I love this. It sounds like the that poem I was on the road to St. Ives. Met a man with 7 wives, each wife had 7 sacks. You know, so you're gonna come across 3 men, and one of them has 3 goats, and one has 3 loaves of bread, and one has a jug of wine. And they're going to give you 2 loaves of bread, take them. Then you go up to where the prophets are coming down after this kind of ecstatic thing that they're in. And that's a whole weird thing about oracles and diviners back in that day. And you're going to encounter them. Did any of that happen?
I guess not. I guess I was thinking when you talked to his uncle about the donkeys, that maybe that was the 2 men, but no.
The part where he runs into the prophets is what happens. Or the seers or whatever. Plus you have this kind of weird contradiction that Samuel says. He says, so the Spirit of the Lord will seize you. You'll go into an ecstasy with them, and you shall turn into another man. And when those signs come upon you, basically do whatever you want. Do whatever seems right to you at that moment. Do whatever, do what your hand finds, whatever your hand finds to do. For God is with you. And then he goes right into saying, when you get to Gilgal, don't do anything until I tell you. So is he supposed to do what he thinks is right? Or is he not supposed to do anything until Samuel tells him? And does any of this come from God? It's not clear.
Right.
I mean, usually if something comes from God, it's preceded by, and the Lord said, or the Lord said unto you, or, something like that. But that is not in here. And that whole part about going to Gilgal is going to be a big deal soon. So the Spirit of the Lord seizes him. And everybody's like, is that Saul? Is Saul among the prophets? And I did not take it this way, so this is why I kind of like this translation. Because he says, the question seems to be a case of just extreme incongruity, like our phrase, a bull in a china shop. So it's basically, Saul being among the prophets is like a bull in a china shop. But Saul doesn't say anything about being king. Notice that? Runs into his uncle. Says everything's fine. Wonder what happened to you. Wandered off again. Saul doesn't say anything about being anointed king. Prince, anyway. So Samuel gathers the people at Mizpah again. Reminds them of the I brought you up out of Egypt thing, right? And we have that, thus says the Lord God of Israel. And then he draws lots to figure out which tribe and which person in there, right? There's one other time that lots are going to be cast in this story. Do you remember when it is? Mm-hmm.
Oh, what we read today.
Yeah. With Jonathan, when he ate the honey and they're casting the lots to see, was it among the military or was it me or my son? And then is it me or my son? And to cast a lot is an accusatory thing. So by casting lots, it's like Saul is guilty of being named king. And I don't know how Samuel didn't know that would be what came across to people back then. They know what's going on. They know how the lots work. So why would he do it that way? These are questions I have about Samuel.
So mine doesn't say anything about lots here. Like in 10, 20, is that where you're at?
Yes?
Mine doesn't say anything
All the
about
tribes.
lots here.
And, in 21, and he brought forward the tribe of Benjamin by its clans, and the lot fell to the Matrite clan, and the lot fell to Saul, son of Kish.
Yeah, no, mine just says
Really
Patrick's
different.
clan was chosen.
Oh, interesting.
But it does have lots with Jonathan.
Yeah, and there are lots here too.
Yeah.
Brought forth all the tribes and all the tribes of Israel, and the lot fell on Benjamin, and the lot fell on clan of Matrite, and the lot fell on Saul.
Just chosen.
Huh. It's another one of those cases where, like I was talking about on Sunday, just are they changing it because we don't like reading the same word over and over again? Are they making decisions for you? I don't know.
But chosen doesn't have the same feeling as you said, like Lot does. You know?
Yeah. So it's like, hey, look, it's not me making it's not me going, oh, look, I already know who it is. So, like the fake psychics or something.
Right.
He's casting lots, and these things are coming up. But again, it was an activity most used to find out whether someone's guilty or not. So Saul is guilty of being king, basically, here. And he's hiding. This guy does not want this. Even when Samuel treats him with respect and implies that he's the king, he's like, why are you talking to me like this? That's when he says, I'm from the small tribe of Benjamin, just a small family within it. Why are you talking to me like this? Like everything belongs to me. And now he's hiding. And 10 minutes into being king, we already have court intrigue. You have the contrast between these. This one translates it as stalwart fellows whose hearts God had touched that went with him. And then you have the worthless fellows who had said, how will this one rescue us? And they spurned him and brought him no tribute. So already, the king's just newly elected. And already half the people hate him. That doesn't sound anything like modern times.
Right.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I love Ecclesiastes. There is nothing new under the sun. And that, even after all this happens, in chapter 11, we come along to Nahash the Ammonite and his threat to basically maim all the people that are nearby, which is, an embarrassment and a statement of dominance. You put out the right eye because you can't fight that way because the left eye is covered by the shield. So, and he's apparently pretty cocky about it because they're like, "Hey, can we go see if we can find some help first?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." And the question, what's a couple more days? Go on. Now the question is, do these people know that Saul has been made king and they're completely snowing this guy? Or are they just hoping to rally somebody like the good old days when Samson and Gideon and Deborah were around? It's kind of hard to tell. We also don't know how long it was because apparently Saul just went home and started working in the fields again. But you get the phrase, after he hears about this, the Spirit of God seized him. And that comes up in chapter 10, 6, and 7, when the Spirit of God seizes you. What does he say? Do what your hand finds to do. So what does his hand find to do as king? What's the first thing a king is going to do? Going to conscript your sons into war. And he does so very graphically. Thanks, Phyllis. I hope so. Probably find out I was an idiot. Phyllis says, someday you'll know with all your questions. Probably find out how much of an idiot I really am. And so they rally the troops. They tell the men to go back. And what do the men go back and do? Treachery. All right, we couldn't find anybody. We'll meet you out there tomorrow. So they completely catch the Ammonites off guard. And not to be outdone, the intrigue continues. After it's all said and done, what do they say? Whoever said Saul shouldn't be king over us, give us these men and we'll put them to death. He's proven his worth. It's exactly what we wanted a king for.
Put them all to death.
So, you don't like it? Put them all to death. And Saul says no, spare them, right? This is really weird. Because what does he do when it comes down to his own son? He's ready to kill him.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and here's kind of the feeling I've been getting through all of this so far. I can only imagine it's going to get better. But politics does things to people. I don't think you I don't know if you know that. That politics really makes people weird and touchy and defensive. Have you ever encountered anybody like that? Never? No?
Oh, yeah.
And becoming a politician changes a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm wondering if this is what the whole shebang is that, here's Saul in his first victory. He's like, no, let everybody live. But by the time he's done this for a while, suddenly it's like anybody who's against me, even if it's my own son, they're gone. Kill them.
Out of here.
Is it the politics that's doing this to people? Is it what's done it to Samuel? Because Samuel throws a little tantrum right after this. And we have a third coronation, I guess, for Saul. Let's go up to Gilgal and we'll renew the kingship there. And all the men of Israel were with him. No dissenters now. And what is he? And what's the first thing that Samuel does? Why are you doing this, people? I'm here. Aren't I good enough? My sons are here. Wouldn't you pick one of them? Even though it was pointed out right at the beginning that his sons were bent and twisted, basically. Twisting justice and bent towards personal gain. Haven't I walked before you all these years? What have I done? And they're like, no, we're good with the king. And he basically says, fine, I'm taking my ball and going home. And he's making sure he's balanced the scales before he goes. If there's anybody who thinks that I've wronged them, let's get it out of the way now. Because I'm going away. And he even has this in verse 13, I think it is. When they say, nah, a king shall reign over us, though the Lord your God was your king. And now here is the king you have chosen and for whom you have asked. Is it the king that they chose? No. They wanted a king. Did they choose Saul? Who chose Saul?
But do you think because of what he did, the military,
The victory,
the fight,
mm-hmm.
that then everybody, got on board with him.
That certainly happened.
Samuel considered that they had chosen him at that point. So sort of like you said, like the third anointing of him.
Yeah.
Like that third time was more their choosing.
Yeah, the one that took.
Their choosing.
Like, it was luck of the draw first time. Or second time. First time for them. But even to say this, here's the king you have chosen, this is directly against the reality that God is actually the one who chose him. God spoke directly to Samuel about him. So they may have chosen him now, but still, this is God's chosen for this purpose. And he keeps repeating this thing, if both you and the king who reigns over you, like he's saying, not my king, doesn't reign over me.
But God didn't want them to have a king. And he said all the bad things that were going to happen because they wanted it. But he like gave it to him anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But so don't you think that Samuel still is thinking that way? Like, this still isn't going to end well.
Well, yeah. In fact, he, very clearly hints to the end of our reading today. I mean, in verse 15 here, but if you heed not the voice of the Lord, and you rebel against the Lord's word, the hand of the Lord will be against you and your king to destroy you. I mean, that's going to come, that's chapter 15 from beginning to end. I don't know how many times the word heed is used in that chapter. It's a lot. But even so, he's still, I mean, every now and then you get these things right here where it's like, wow. Did God choose Samuel? Or did God choose Saul? Or did Samuel choose Saul? And he just grows to regret the decision. It gets real hazy with the way Samuel talks in here. I don't know. I'm going to be straight up with that now. I don't know. He does perform a nice little miracle for them, though. And how many of you know farmers?
What?
Farmers?
Farmer?
Mm-hmm. Know any farmers?
My father-in-law was a farmer.
Yeah? So when it was time to bring in the crops, and when it was time to bring in the crops, and it rained, how happy was he?
Very unhappy.
Yeah.
He said a lot of bad words
Yeah.
in German.
Yep. In German.
Yeah, he was way German.
Because this is what happens, because he says, isn't the wheat harvest today? So I'm going to call out to the Lord. He will send thunder and rain. So you can see, you can mark and see. And that's exactly what happened. So there was a lot of probably swearing in Hebrew at that point in time. And they say, hey, we're not asking you to go away mad. They're not even really asking him to go away. He's the one saying he's going to go away. And they're like, why? No one's asking you to stop being, the prophet, being the one who intercedes between God and us. And he's like, well, far be it from me to not do that. But, is he manipulating the situation here? Doesn't it feel like he is a little bit? Or at least playing, an emotional card here? He was willing to put his own sons there. He knows what his kids are like.
Yeah, I guess the way you put it is like he doesn't want to give up. I mean, like he didn't, even at the end, with the rain, or not at the end, but just the end of this that we're talking about, his farewell speech.
Yeah.
He was like, see how powerful I am?
Yeah, this is what you're turning down. Yeah. Look at what I can do.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know, it seems manipulative, emotionally manipulative and petty. Like, you should have chosen me. I should be the one. I am interested to know what your chapter 13 verse 1 says.
Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel 42 years.
Okay. Because mine has...
Mine's just the opposite of that. Said he was 40 years old when he took over Israel and reigned for 32 years.
Here's the fun part. This one says, because mine just says Saul was, and then it has brackets with nothing in it. Saul was brackets years old when he became king, and brackets 2 years he reigned over Israel. And this is what the note says. The Masoretic text, which is one of the widely circulated, oldest versions of the Old Testament, is notoriously defective at this point. It says Saul was a year old, and 2 years he reigned. That whole sentence is absent from the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament done back then, leading one to suspect that the editor here stitched into the story a textual fragment in which there were gaps in the numbers, and he didn't presume to fill them in. So,
Everybody put in what they wanted to.
seems that way, doesn't it?
Well, I'm not sure why it matters.
Yeah, it's one of those things where,
But why it was put right there, it didn't,
yeah,
you know, you almost thought, oh, this is coming to an end or something, you know, but we still needed a couple chapters.
kind of is coming to an end though.
Yeah, we still needed a couple chapters.
It's also a regular, pattern. You'll find this with all the kings. How old they were when they started. And part of me thinks, because you do have this phrase way back when, that so this is in 10. This is 10:6, and the Spirit of the Lord shall seize you, and you shall go into ecstasy with them, and you shall turn into another man. So is this maybe 1 year from that point? That it all started, that he was actually crowned for that third time, and then now it's been 2 more years? I don't know. So he has an army with him. And this is where it's going to get tricky again. Or a little confusing and greasy. I don't know. a little too political. You have this phrase, Jonathan struck down the Philistine prefect. That phrase, struck down, is usually used for, an action that happened in battle. But it's just the prefect who died. So there's kind of an implication here that Jonathan, by the way, did you know Saul had a son, an adult son named Jonathan? Because he didn't show up anywhere prior to this. There he is, full grown. But it looks like Jonathan assassinated him, probably. And Saul blew the ram's horn throughout the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." Hebrews is a term that's used by non-Jews about Jews. Because whenever, this is one of those rare places where, and it happens a couple times just in this section, where Israel's people or some leader in it is calling everybody else in Israel Hebrews. And the origin of the word Hebrew is thought to be Hebrew, which is an Egyptian word, which means basically the dregs of society who are found on the outer edges of a city. So when they call somebody a Hebrew in this, they're calling them the scum of the earth, the outcasts, the nobodies, And so when Saul says it, it's almost like, and the Philistines are calling them Hebrews all the time. They have already up to this point. And so he's like, let the Hebrews hear. He's almost taking the derogatory term and using it as a rallying cry. Are you scum with me? Are all my fellow scum with me, or outcasts with me? So they're outnumbered by the Philistines. And here we are, we're at Gilgal, right? And what's supposed to happen?
Samuel was supposed to come.
7 days in, Samuel's supposed to come and do the offering. It's 7 days in. Where is Samuel?
He didn't come.
Why didn't he come?
You already told him farewell.
And when he doesn't, and so what happens? Saul's like, he's not coming. But the offering should be made to God. We're about to go into battle. So he does it himself. And Samuel will choose him out. So first of all, Samuel's like, see ya. Walks away. And then, he shows up at 11:59 and 45 seconds on the 7th day. And he gets mad at Saul. And he says, you've played the fool. Had you but kept the command of the Lord your God that he commanded you. When did God command him to do that?
This says that Saul had the burnt offerings and the fellowship offerings, and he offered up the burnt offerings.
Mm-hmm.
Just as he finished making offerings, Samuel arrived.
Yep. And a little later on, he asks, what have you done, right?
Yeah, he said, you acted foolishly.
Yeah. Had you but kept the command of the Lord your God that he commanded you. Did God command that?
So what, he didn't have the patience to...
The patience, the day was almost over. Samuel doesn't show up until everything's already done, too.
But it was the same day.
Maybe. I don't know how long it takes.
So Samuel's ticked that he didn't wait for him.
Well, yeah, and
before he did the offerings.
yeah, and because even up before that in verse 8 it says, and he waited 7 days for the fixed time that Samuel had set, and Samuel did not come. So did he actually do the offering on the 8th day? And Samuel doesn't show up until the end and gets mad at him? And did the Lord command it?
So it says, so Saul had thousands of these soldiers or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And they all, most of them scattered.
Yep.
And left, and then it says at the end, Saul counted the men who were with him. They numbered about 600.
Yeah, so he lost about 1,400 guys. Because they were afraid of the battle with the Philistines. And Samuel wasn't showing up.
So at the end of chapter 9, where Samuel's telling Saul about being a king, he sends his servant. He says, but you stay here a while so that I may give you a message from God. So that's when he tells him all of the other stuff. And the only thing that really came true out of that was the prophecy. And then that's when he tells him to go down ahead of me to Gilgal. So to me that is all sort of in quotes. And like that was the message from God. So your question, about whether that really came from God, I'm trying to make Samuel look like a little better guy than
I understand.
than you're making him out.
I'm just trying to understand because it's very confusing. Because because he does say that, and then he says, "Has not the Lord anointed you over his inheritance as prince?" we know that's what God said because that showed up in chapter 9 already.
Right.
Here's the one I've anointed prince. But did God say the rest of that? Or did Samuel tack it on? I mean, it's just one of those things that's weird. Plus, he doesn't show up when he's supposed to anyway.
Right.
And it's kind of like the thing where, all right, find us a king. All right, go home. I'll get right on that. And now he says, I'll be there in 7 days. And he's not there in 7 days. And he shows up. I told you to wait for me. Dragging his feet again. It just seems weird. It just seems, especially after his little tantrum. Like he's looking for an excuse or he's trying to set Saul up. I'm not saying Saul is the brightest bulb in the marquee by any means. But he, if you're not the brightest bulb in the marquee, you might want to hold the guy's hand a little bit.
So throughout this whole thing, here, they've been waging war.
Yeah, or at least skirmishes, because David's the one who's actually going to defeat and expand the borders, but Saul is at least, keeping everybody at, in control. And here they're going against the Philistines, who are the primary enemy. And if I hadn't said this to you out loud before, the modern enunciation of the word Philistine is Palestine. So this has been going on for a while. And they were assembling, I mean, we had, 3,000 people for Saul in his army? Does it say how many were from the Philistines? Yeah, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen.
This was 3,000 men from 3,000 from Israel, 2,000 were with him in Mishmash, whatever.
I like pronouncing it that way too, just because that's what Mishmash. Yep.
And then 1,000 was with Jonathan.
Yep. So there were 3,000 altogether. 2,000 were with him, and 1,000 were with Jonathan. Meanwhile,
the Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers,
horsemen, yeah.
horsemen, and soldiers as numerous as the sands on the seashore.
Yeah. So
they were outnumbered like
bad.
Buster.
Yeah. So that's why they were all sneaking away too. They're like, I'm not fighting this. So Saul's just trying to rally the troops and do what he's supposed to do, and Samuel just kind of saunters up a day late and yells at him. And then he makes the statement, the Lord has already sought out for himself a man after his own heart. And the Lord has appointed him prince to his people, for you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. When did Saul hear that? He's been too busy chewing, or when did Samuel hear that? He's been too busy chewing Saul out. Or is he late because he was setting this up? These are the things that I'm thinking. Is he late because he was already stopping by somebody else's house? I'm sorry, it just seems... It's at least political. It's at least that. I don't know. It just seems that way. So the Philistine army breaks up into 3 columns, heading for 3 different places. And you find out actually early on that the Philistines have occupied this territory, even into Benjamin for a while. Because you find out that the Israelites have no weapons. Because the Philistines forbade any metal workers. And then they would, so even for your, if you're a farmer and you have to sharpen your sickle or your pitchfork or your plow or whatever, you have to go to a Philistine metal worker and have them sharpen it, and they charge you 2/3 of a day's wages. So, nice of them.
So on the day of the battle, not a soldier with Saul and Jonathan had a sword or spear in his hand.
Mm-hmm.
Only Saul and his son Jonathan.
Yep. So those two only seem to be the only ones with a weapon. And then you have this nice little contrast between Jonathan and Saul. Jonathan is doing a little more subterfuge, a little sneak attack, planning a sneak attack. What's Saul doing? Sitting under a pomegranate tree. just sitting there. Sounds a lot like Eli, though, doesn't it? Who's always sitting. He was sitting outside the temple in the beginning, sitting outside at the city gates just before he fell over and broke his neck. And Saul also has with him... All right, I'm going to ask you, who does he have with him that he's trusting for advice?
The son of Ichabod,
Who is the son of...
the brother of, the son of Phineas, which is Eli's son.
Yeah.
That was killed.
So he's turned to one of Eli's grandsons, or great-grandsons, I guess, for Eli would be the grandson of Eli's son, or Phineas's son. Well, yes. So it's Eli, then Phineas, then Ichabod, and then Ahijah.
Say Ichabod, all I can think of is Ichabod.
I know, right?
How did he get in this story? Oh well.
So he's turned to because Samuel's left him again, and he knows at least he knows he's not a smart man. So he's trying to find somebody who's at least loosely, associated with God and the Ark and the temple and all that. You got to give him a little bit of credit. He doesn't choose wisely, but it might. It's one of those things. Is this the best of the worst? What because he's got to have something. And so he asks him to basically divine whether or not, or divine what's going on over there as he's seeing the scrambling around, and he says, "Wait a minute, never mind." And here you have that thing again where Jonathan's armor bearer says, "Do whatever your heart inclines." Shows up a lot. And he sets up a two-pointed choice again, right? If we do this and they say, "Wait there, we're coming to you," we'll improvise. If they say, "Come up to us," we're going to kill them. And we'll know that God's going to be on our side. So that's kind of the casting of the lots again. If this happens or if this happens. Nice little foreshadowing. So they called him up, right? And apparently whatever they did scared the crud out of the Philistines that they started killing each other. Now, according to the text, it said that was the fear of God, but, I grew up with two older brothers. I just the phrase that keeps going through my head is, stop hitting yourself, stop hitting yourself. So Jonathan does a heroic feat, right? And this phrase, and there were Hebrews who were previously with the Philistines. These were probably people who were captured and, slaves or servants of some kind, and they turn on them also. So already you've increased your numbers. And the Lord delivered Israel on that day. What does verse 24 say for you?
Now the men of Israel were in distress that day because Saul had bound the people under an oath, saying, Cursed be any man who eats food before evening comes, before I have avenged myself on my enemies.
Okay, so they actually tied the what was it? They were distressed because they made the vow.
I think that was the day they were fighting.
Yeah, and
because Saul had bound the people
yeah,
under an oath.
so they were under distress because he bound them together. It's not because it's a sequential thing. They were already in distress because they'd been fighting all day and they were hungry, and then Saul piles on with the oath. So it's not because they made the oath. They made the oath when they were hungry already. What do you think of this command? What's he trying to do?
Have them show their dedication or whatever.
It could be it could be. I think it's interesting that he uses the phrase, until I take vengeance on my enemies. It's not we and our. It's not even I and take vengeance upon God's enemies or something like that. Is he trying to force God's hand by making him make this vow? See, look at the sacrifice we're making. We're all going hungry. Do your part.
So Saul's army went in and they ate the honey.
No, it was Jonathan. Just Jonathan.
Jonathan.
Yeah. Who hadn't heard about the oath? Does yours say that? Because mine says, but Jonathan had not heard when his father made the troops swear.
Not heard. His father found the people were with the oath. So he reached out the end of the staff that was in his hand and dipped it into the honeycomb.
Yeah, but it sounds like a soldier told him, you're like this, and the guy's going, Dad said, you can't eat, that's why everybody else is eating, and that's why everybody else is faint. Oh, well, so he did, it sounds like he actually got told before he did it, and he said
Well, his eyes lit up, because this says he brought his hand back to his mouth and his eyes lit up. So it's almost like he had just put it in his mouth when the guy goes, wait!
Yeah, then he raises him to the mouth, and then one of the soldiers told him, your father bound the army under a strict oath, saying, Cursed be any man who eats food today. This is why
Mm-hmm. So they win. But what's the price of victory in this particular case?
Like them then eating the meat with the blood.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Doing all what they weren't supposed to.
Yeah, they broke the law, by eating the meat with the blood still in it. They were supposed to drain it first. Yeah. Yeah, this is Levitical law, this is Mount Sinai law stuff.
Right. Big stuff.
Yeah. This is right from the big guy himself. But I mean, whose fault is that? I mean, isn't that kind of Saul's fault?
Right.
These guys have been fighting for at least 2 days, probably. They haven't eaten. What did you think they were going to do? It just seems like a setup. I mean, he tries to make everything better. He says, wait, stop eating and bring it here and let's finish the process. But, they're hungry. Think about that in modern terms. What happens when you drive starving people into desperate situations?
They steal.
Yeah.
Do what they have to get food.
Yeah, they have to eat, so they do what they have to, and then we say, oh, you're a criminal. That's kind of what Les Miserables is all about, right? Jean Valjean steals a loaf of bread, so he's put in prison for 3 years because his family is starving. Which back then, only the men could work. So he tries to escape so he can make sure his family can still eat, and the years just keep adding up. And so he has the plan to go and basically attack the Philistines for the rest of the night, right? But he wants to get basically permission from God. So once again, Saul is trying to do the right thing, it seems. He doesn't know if he should do it. Seems like a good idea. Maybe we should ask God. And God does not answer him. He's always seeking answers. Nobody's ever given. And he even asks another question, where is the offense that was done today that's kept God from answering? Right? So this is when they cast the lots again. And so you have the casting, and like I said, the casting the lots is defines the guilty person. Who does it land on? Jonathan. And who at least owns up to it. He plays it down a little. I had a taste of it, yeah. But he hadn't heard of the vow. And yet the dice, or the lots, still show him as guilty. Thoughts on that one? But again, even though Saul is ready to spare the people who are like, how's this guy going to save us? Way back when, now it's his own son, and he's like, kill him. And he's saved by the men.
Don't you think that, I mean, like, give you my son, sacrifice my son, maybe then you'll tell me what I'm supposed to do. Like, that would be like the ultimate, thing. Don't you think that's sort of, what Saul thought?
Yeah, or at least I'm not willing to exclude my son from the law. We made a promise. There's another story that happens like this in Judges. The guy's name is Jephthah, and he's going out to do battle, and he says, if the Lord lets us win this battle, and I survive it, when I come home, the first living thing that I see when I come home, I will sacrifice to God. And he comes home, and his daughter rushes out the door to greet him. So it's just another one of those stupid vows you didn't have to make, and now you've gotten yourself in trouble. And when you get into the next part, after Jonathan is saved, you have this reiteration of the battles that he's been doing and kind of keeping people in check. And then you get Saul's lineage. And this is done later on, especially in Kings and stuff like that. This is done when someone's dead. So this is kind of the person telling this story, they're saying, so this is basically the end of Saul's reign, folks. This is where it all falls apart. So make sure you know everybody involved, and then we get into chapter 15, which is quite the big deal. Do you know who the Amalekites are? There's one very famous Amalekite that you probably don't know who he is, though it's probably a book you know of. Ever heard of the book of Esther? You know what happens in the book of Esther? No? Check it out. It's real short. It's like 4 chapters, but it's a quick story, and it's actually the only book in the Bible where God is never mentioned. But the main bad guy in there, suddenly why he's the main bad guy will make a lot of sense. So you have this very, this was a common practice back then. So when people say, God's a brutal God, it seems brutal, but this was just kind of one of those unfortunate realities where sometimes you have to destroy an enemy completely. And God is like, when I say completely, I mean completely. Killing, you shall put to death man, woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. And it begins with this phrase, the Lord has sent me to anoint you as king over his people Israel, and now heed the voice of the words of the Lord. Remember where that comes in back here? Chapter 12, if you do not heed the voice of the Lord. So he says, kill everything. Does Saul kill everything? Nope. In fact, this is another one of those things. Okay, so he clearly didn't do what he was supposed to do. He clearly tries to cover his butt. He's like, because Samuel comes up to him and says, blessed be you to the Lord. I fulfilled the word of the Lord. Samuel said, really? What is that sound of sheep in my ears? And the sound of cattle that I hear? I believe the command of the Lord was kill everything, but I can't hear what you're saying over all the cattle. And what's his excuse?
Well, they were the good ones. Wanted them for sacrifice.
Yeah, we're gonna sacrifice them to God. That's what we were gonna do.
Fattest ones. Yeah.
And the king, Agag, was that his name? Yeah, the king. It's like, he's still alive too. You're not going to sacrifice him. Well, you're not going to. Let's just say that. And he tries to, that's what he tries to do. He says, no, we did these to sacrifice to God. And Samuel's like, let me just stop you right there. And he calls back all the way to the beginning of when he met him. Though you may be small in your own eyes. From the smallest tribe in the smallest family. You're the head of all the tribes of Israel. And the Lord anointed you king over Israel. And the Lord sent you on a mission and said, you'll kill everything. And here we go again. Why did you not heed the voice of the Lord? And Samuel says, but I did heed the voice of the Lord. I went on the mission God sent me. I brought back Agag, king of the Amalek, but Amalek I put under... But, I brought back the king, but everybody else... And then he tries to lay it on the troops, but the troops took the sheep and cattle, but they did it to sacrifice to God. And then, does yours put this in a poem, Samuel's stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, good, because that's important, because you have a pattern that repeats itself later on with, like, Jeremiah and Isaiah, especially, and a couple of the minor prophets. In this phrase, does the Lord take delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices? Or in heeding the voice of the Lord? For heeding is better than sacrifice, hearkening than the fat of rams. And he says, since you have cast off the word of the Lord, he has cast you aside as king. This is also interesting. We're going to get into something. Because just before Samuel goes to him, the Lord actually speaks to Samuel. Before he goes to Saul. And what does the Lord say? I'm interested in your translation of, I think, verse 11 maybe? And the word of the Lord came to Samuel.
I am grieved that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions.
Interesting. Anybody else got a different translation? What's yours read?
It says, I regret that I have made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me, and has not carried out my commands. And Samuel was distressed and cried out to the Lord all night.
Your son, I am.
Both said grieved. I am grieved. Right at the beginning of 11. Right at the beginning of 11.
regret.
Regret.
Does yours have something different, Steve?
Same
This
as
is
her.
the same as
Oh, same. Okay. Okay. Now I want you to look at another verse in 15. It's near the end. Verse 29. And what's more, Israel's eternal does not lie or change.
His mind.
Same thing?
Yep.
Interesting. The word there? So, in verse 11, so 10, 11, and the word of the Lord came to Samuel saying, I repent that I made Saul king, for he has turned back from me. And, that turned back is, repent would be turning towards, and Saul is turning back, right? So I repent. And then Samuel says, for Israel's eternal does not deceive and does not repent. But
It said to him, he repent.
yeah.
Thank God.
See, this is where I'm like, Samuel, what are you doing? And again, this is one of those things, how much of what Samuel has been saying is from Samuel and how much of it's from God? I also think it's very interesting because I think we're all familiar with the story of David and Bathsheba, right? So, afterwards, a prophet goes up to David and says, you did a bad thing. And David says, I repent. Let me, I've transgressed. He literally says basically what Saul says, I've offended and I've transgressed the utterance of the Lord and your word, which is interesting because the utterance of the Lord and your word, Samuel. So does he think Samuel's word and God's word are one thing? And is that why he's got himself into kind of trouble? And did Samuel take advantage of that understanding? But anyway, for I feared for the troops and listened to their voice, which is also weird because God said to Samuel at the beginning of this, listen to their voice and give him a king. So now Saul's doing it. Now he's in trouble. So he says, forgive, pray my offense and turn back with me that I may bow down before the Lord. And Samuel says, no. But when David repents in front of Nathan, of course. So would God have allowed Saul's repentance, or had Samuel had enough? These are questions that I have. I remember when you walked in, I said, it's like a soap opera. It's like watching, Game of Thrones, or what was it? What's the one that was the House of Cards, or some political, scheming machination TV show or movie. It's just, what is going on? Why would a prophet and priest of God not allow someone to repent and make an atonement?
You just think he's some conniving guy, don't you?
I'm beginning to think so. Yeah, I really am.
Got all these political reasons for doing what he's doing, and it's not forthright.
Well, why else would he do it? That's my only question. And this is why I have these questions, because I don't know why else he would do this. Why? I mean, even in going back to Deuteronomy and Levitical law and stuff like that, there is always the ability to repent and atone. And Samuel denies that. So, yeah. And it's of course Samuel actually, I love the way that he phrases this. They call for the king, Agag, who went to him with mincing steps. So this guy thinks he's getting off scot-free. And Samuel basically butchers him. And then he left. And Saul went to Ramah. Or Saul went to Gibeah Saul, and Samuel went to Ramah, and they never saw each other again. And yeah, this phrase for Samuel was grieved about Saul, which is this kind of clever way, if you ask me, because grieving is meant for someone who is dead, and so it's seems to me a way of saying Saul the king is dead.
That he made Saul king over Israel.
Oh, see, that's an interesting phrasing too, because then it implies that it was Samuel who actually made the choice,
right, and
not God.
Right.
Did he do it because of the reasons way back in the beginning? This guy looks like a king. You know, rich, tall, handsome, strong. So again, is Samuel doing all these things because he regrets now that? It's juicy. You got to give it that. I mean, especially right there at the end when God says, "I repent of the choice," and Samuel says, "God doesn't repent." He just said it. Yeah. Anyway, so next week. 1 Samuel 16, and it's just going through the first verse of chapter 25.
Oh, right.
And that is the death of Samuel. So.
His farewell thing was the death, but I guess that it would have been a little too early.
Yeah, right. Can't have him. Can't have him without the finger in the pie still for a little while. Oh. By the way, it might not actually be the last time Saul and Samuel will see each other.